let's start with Lamont, because we got a couple of God calls here. So let's start with Lamont calling in from Wobbly Axolotls, who just says that God exists. Let's talk about it. Lamont, you're on the line with Forrest and Zina. How are you doing today?
Hey, I'm good. How are you guys doing?
I'm doing really well. Thank you so much for calling in. So before we get started, really quick, what God are we talking about?
What do you mean by that?
Like, which God? Is it the God of the Bible? Is it the God of Islam? Is it, the Geechee Manitou? Is it, Native American gods? Is it Zeus? Is it Thor? Is it Poseidon? Like, who are we talking about?
I believe all of those entities have fundamental similarities and only superficial differences. So I guess I would classify myself as a mystic.
Okay. So do you believe in one God or lots of them?
I believe in one God. Lots of different interpretations, though.
Would you say that there is any particular interpretation of God that is the most accurate?
No.
Or no? Okay, great.
But I mean, I'm an idealist, so I think we can start from there. That it's reasonable to say that consciousness is fundamental, and out of consciousness arise things like perspectives. So first, you like primary substrate of awareness, out of which come ideas and concepts. But all those ideas and concepts are transient, and after we die, we just go back to that fundamental subjectivity that God is.
Cool. So like the Force.
I wouldn't say force, because when you're saying force, you're talking about like energy, maybe, and that either has to be kinetic or potential.
No, I was saying like the Force, like from Star Wars, where like when you die, you just go back to this kind of thing that's all encompassing and flows through everybody and stuff.
I don't know that the Force would be thought of as conscious or omnibenevolent, though. I may be wrong. I'm a little bit rusty on my George Lucas.
Okay, well, so you are saying that this God is omnibenevolent.
Oh, sure.
Okay, and just a couple more questions really quick, just to make sure I know what we're talking about. Is this God also omnipotent?
Yes.
Okay. And then one more, actually two more, sorry. Is it also omniscient? Is it all-knowing? Is it all three omnis?
I might need your help with this one, because as far as omniscient goes, I would say that all knowledge is either latent or expressed from within this entity. So in that sense, omniscient, yeah.
Okay, we'll put a question mark next to that one. And then last but not least, does this God have the ability to think, to make decisions, and to take actions on its own accord?
In order to do that, this God would have to localize and become like you or your host or me. So in order to think, you need a mind, which is correlated with brains, and that's a weakness. So God would have no need for thinking because he's omniscient. He would already know all things. So in order to think, you'd have to localize, just like you'd have to localize within a dream in order to fly, for instance.
So non-thinking, what about the other two, about being able to take actions and influence physical reality of its own free will?
No, I don't believe that God is an agent, because agency would frustrate omniscience.
Got it. Okay, so just to be clear, I've got a monotheistic God based on idealism. All religions are kind of true. This God is omnibenevolent, omnipotent, and maybe, based on the way you squint your eyes, maybe omniscient. It is non-thinking, non-acting, and is not an agent. I got that about summed up?
I think so.
Okay, groovy. All right, we'll go right ahead. Zina, do you want to kick us off?
Sure, I can start. Well, first of all, when I, asked to do this question first, this is kind of like one of the interesting topics and questions I have when it comes to God. I just think to start, it's more so just like when we say that this God is the God that exists, I think that as we started, what's most important is defining God. And it seems to me that we're kind of defining God as almost like the collective conscious in some way. There are many different ways to describe this. And I think we see different interpretations in different ways, but you kind of define God as some collective conscious. Do you think that's kind of a word that maybe, or phrase that maps on to this concept of God that you have?
Sure. Yeah, I think that's fair. It's just God is the fundamental thing out of which everything else temporarily, everything else is a temporary excitation out of this fundamental thing that's God.
Like a field.
Right. Yeah. And
quantum field.
yeah. And I think when we talk about God in this way, I think it's interesting. And this is why I call myself agnostic, because there's so many different interpretations of what God is. Like, for example, when we look at Spinoza like says things that are somewhat similar to what you're saying, and that he defines things. Some things are like forms, some things are substances. But innately, we kind of all are dependent and contingent upon each other and come from something like similar. Like, for example, at the start of the universe, if we look at things even just like from like a metaphysical level, began, and from that point in which the universe started to expand, we all came from that. So in essence, we all did come from something similar. And then when we go to consciousness, I think that's where it gets a little bit interesting. I guess I have a couple questions. In one, how you define consciousness, and two, I think that even if this God does exist, I think it is important to make a distinction kind of between the way in which people kind of feel about or talk about like a Christian or a Muslim God versus a God sort of like this. But I guess, can I get your definition of consciousness?
Yeah, I borrow the definition of consciousness from David Chalmers, who coined the hard problem of consciousness. And he says that consciousness is what it is like to be. So presumably, it isn't like anything to be a book. Therefore, a book is not conscious. But it is like something to be you. It is like something to be me. And similarly, it is like something to be God. It's a mode of being. So it's not a property of anything. It's a way of being, or it's a mode of being.
Really quick, Lamont, do you have us on Bluetooth or headphones or anything like that?
No, just on my phone.
Okay, cool. There's just a couple of interferences and some sounds. I was seeing if we could fix it. If we can't, it's no big deal. Okay, so we can go on with what you're talking about.
Yeah, no, that's it. I borrowed the same definition from David Chalmers. I try to avoid neologisms.
Yep. That's fine.
So I guess just one more question is, when you say we all go back to this consciousness, because I agree that we are having some experience. I don't know. I think some questions we also have is like, is consciousness a thing? Does it really exist? And that is it material, etc. And when you say that we go back to consciousness, what does that look like for you? And how are we able to tell that that is the case?
I would say that when you die, the object of experience melts away. I don't know this for sure, so I like to start by just saying, like, look, I don't know. And I think that's really important to start with that. But I think that's one of the main goals of brain, is to separate this from that, here from there, agent versus arena. And we can even see, like with experiments done with high dose psychedelic drugs, when you're in a high dose psychedelic state, the default mode network shuts down, the task centric network shuts down. People experience what they call ego death, where like the agent arena distinction kind of collapses, and you go into this mode, which is kind of like pure subjectivity. And this brain state on high dose psychedelics is like the closest we can come to being brain dead in a safe and repeatable way. And yet this is the most exciting experience that, people can have in their lives sometimes.
Yeah. So I suppose going back to this consciousness, like, I know no one really knows what happens when we die, but I suppose if we don't, were you saying that you don't necessarily know if we go back to this consciousness? Like you aren't actually sure if that's the case, or are you speculating? Or
well, I mean, I think it would be my best guess. I think it would be the most skeptical thing to say, because consciousness cannot be doubted, because it's the prerequisite for doubt, and it cannot be an illusion, because it's a prerequisite for illusion. You can't have an illusion without being conscious. You can't doubt without being conscious. And so I think that it's a safe bet to prioritize it over the things that are emergent from it. So, I mean, even though I don't know, I mean, it might be the case that when we die, consciousness dies too. But from my perspective, consciousness never developed. It never grows. It's always been the same. My mind has grown. My thoughts have developed. I've become more mature. But consciousness seems to just have this thing where it stays the same. It's just running in the background. And I have no reason to believe that when my biology dies, that consciousness will. That would just be a leap.
I
I've
think
got
I
a series of
suppose my
questions whenever you're ready.
yeah. Go ahead. Actually, go ahead.
Okay, it's fine. I didn't want to derail you. I'm just telling you. Oh my God, that's a wild thing to say. I would start by asking about just the. Sorry.
Oh no, I'm sorry. I apologize. Go ahead.
You're fine. So I want to start with the last thing you said, and then I want to work my way backwards. Can you please give me any example that we can actually test and observe and of consciousness existing absent matter?
Well, I can't give you an example of consciousness existing because of matter. I mean, because of my material body, you can have signs of consciousness. So you have evidence that consciousness emerges from brain states? There's a Nobel Prize waiting for you if that's the case.
That's pretty much like, granted, the hard problem of consciousness about what it really is and blah, 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 blah. Like, sure, we don't know exactly what it is, but I think it's overwhelmingly evident that it is at least dependent on matter to exist. It is an emergent property. And we can look back to like the earliest understandings of neuroscience and psychology and I guess neuropsychology is this thing, but we can look back to the earliest examples of this, all back to like Phineas Gage type shit, and know that the structure of your brain determines quite a bit about how your consciousness is expressed, if indeed it exists at all. If that wasn't the case, then we wouldn't be able to dramatically alter somebody's entire consciousness, not just their basic parts of their personality, but what they're aware of, what the information they are able to process about the world around them, how, if at all, they are able to make decisions, like all sorts of things beyond just their personality, but also critically including their personality, simply by altering parts of their nervous system, mainly their brain. So like when I look across the animal kingdom and I look at all sorts of things that have different levels of consciousness and different kinds of consciousness, all of those things have one thing in common, is that they are made of matter. And I have yet to see any example of any kind of consciousness at all that exists independent of matter. So you might say that I have not done whatever prerequisite test to say conclusively that brains produce consciousness. And I would scoff at that, but like at the end of the day, sure, that can be our hang up. But I can still show you that brains are directly responsible and a major part of the expression of consciousness. And you've got nothing in terms of consciousness exists absence of all of this. So like, that's what I'm asking. Can you give me anything to point to say that consciousness is not the direct result of matter?
I did with the 2012 study. I don't know if you guys partake.
I'm sorry,
but,
would you please? I'm sorry, you were breaking up at the beginning. Please repeat
I can talk about. Oh, sorry about that. I said, yeah, I'm somebody who partakes. You know what I mean? I'm a big fan of Terence McKenna. So the high dose psychedelic studies, which is what I brought up before, this is the closest that the brain can get to being brain dead in a safe and repeatable way. And yet, even though the brain metabolism is slowing to a crawl in those instances, this is the most deep and meaningful and colorful and vibrant experience most people say that they're having in their lives. That's not proof by any means. And, it's not like they haven't found like little tiny, pieces of the, brain communicating in those states. But that's not the only piece of evidence I have. I mean, it's saying that consciousness emerges from brain states just because signs of consciousness are there is making the same mistake of saying that flames are responsible for combustion, right? Combustion can exist without flames. That's not accurate. Electrostatic can exist without lightning.
So you are missing the point of what I'm saying. So let me use your examples to restate what I'm saying. When brain activity slows to a crawl, we call that a coma. And that's not exactly the most exciting part of a person's life. You are describing an altered mental state brought about by psychedelics. And yes, I have also done plenty of psychedelics in my life, and I have felt some altered brain states. It did not tell me anything new about the existence of consciousness, that it exists outside of me in any way. And if you have a study that says this person did X amount of acid, and now we have a reason to think that consciousness is ethereal and not related to matter at all, I'd love to see that study. But so far, no, that is. I didn't say you did. I didn't say you did. But that is what I'm asking for. I didn't say you did say those things. I am asking you specifically if you have any reason, any serious evidence of consciousness existing outside of, independent of matter. And you're giving me this runaround about psychedelics and stuff. And now you're also talking about this idea that we can, what was the last thing you said? Repeat it about the combustion. Pardon me. I was going to have you repeat it, but I remember exactly how you said it. You said that I'm saying that fire exists on its own, or fire is evidence of combustion, as opposed to, that's not at all what I'm saying. I am pointing to the fact that if you put hydrocarbons and oxygen together with heat, you then produce carbon dioxide and water. That is the chemical formula of combustion. Fire is the physical manifestation of that formula that you can see with your mind, or with your eyes. That is something that you can witness now, that chemical reaction taking place. So I'm not saying that the fire is showing evidence of, like, none of that. I am literally looking for the constituent parts here. And the constituent parts of consciousness is some kind of matter. I would argue it's neurons. But if you want to say something other than brains, I'm not going to get into nitpicky. It is matter. It is something that is made of atoms and takes up space and has mass. So do you have evidence, of any consciousness whatsoever that is verifiably independent of material, of matter?
Okay. When we're talking about reduction bases in metaphysics, the world looks just as it should if materialism were true. The world also looks just as it should if idealism is true. The world looks just as it should if constitutive panpsychism is true. Physicists don't care about metaphysics. What I'm saying is I'm starting with a different assumption. And I'm wondering, because what you're saying is, I'm saying consciousness is fundamental. And now that's a guess, right? And I'll admit that to you. It may be true that there are some particles or some, I don't know, fairies, pixie dust, whatever it is that you might assume is floating outside of consciousness. But I'm saying consciousness is all we have. It's the thing that we know for sure exists. If you think something exists outside of awareness that gives rise to awareness itself, that is by definition completely blocked from any shred of evidence, even in principle. So if you believe
which means you're one twitch away from the hard solipsism issue, and saying if consciousness is all you know to exist, your consciousness is all you know to exist, you're now in the same issue of saying I don't know that anything exists besides my brain or besides my mind. It gets you nowhere.
I don't think so.
And meanwhile, you're saying, okay, solve the problem of hard solipsism then.
Yeah, I think it's easy. So the materialist wants us to believe in four things. Number one, that you are conscious. Number two, that others are conscious. Number three, that there is something outside of consciousness. And number four, that thing gives rise to consciousness itself. So the idealist takes the first two and just rejects the second two based on skepticism. So I'm going to say, number one, consciousness does exist because I can't doubt it and it can't be illusion. Number two, other people's consciousness exists, and I think even though I can't prove that your consciousness exists, I can believe that it's reasonable based on evidence. If you touch a hot stove, you're going to respond in general the same way that I do. So
you just
that
described
doesn't defeat solipsism, as you know. Every philosopher knows hard solipsism can't be defeated.
Yes, which is what I just said to you, and then you said you could easily defeat it, and then you just described faith. You haven't done anything that you claim to be able to do. And I haven't even gotten into the actual serious questions about your God yet. I'm just trying to understand.
You think in order to set up a defeater, you have to have a proof?
I'm just trying to understand if you're saying that the whole universe looks as exactly as it should if there's materialism and idealism. Okay, on this planet right now, it looks exactly as it should if the sun orbited the Earth. It would look the exact way. How can we actually then verify whether the sun orbits the Earth or the Earth orbits the sun? We can actually do some tests and figure that out. You are now telling me that at the end of the day, you just have to make an assumption, and that isn't reasonable to me.
No,
Zina has something to say.
Not at all. No, you've misheard me. The universe looks just as it should if there's a teapot orbiting Saturn. I'm asking for evidence that there is such a teapot. You and I both believe and agree that there is awareness.
I have provided you evidence. I have provided evidence. I have provided evidence. I'm going to just put you on mute for a second because you need to hear me. I have provided evidence and just so many better scientists than I will ever be have provided just more evidence than we can possibly imagine that consciousness is at least seriously associated with matter. I am asking you for any evidence whatsoever that consciousness can exist absent of matter, and we've gotten nowhere. Zina, you had something that you wanted to say before I bring the Lamont back.
Yeah, for sure. And I think also the biggest fundamental issue we're kind of like running into is like, what does exist truly mean? Like in that, like what do you mean when you say that consciousness exists? Like, what are we kind of positing to be that case? I think many materialists will take that like existence means that something is actually like materially like there, like maybe it's made up of matter or something of the sort. I guess like when we talk about consciousness, I suppose the real question is like, what do you mean when you say that consciousness exists, or like that thoughts, or like maybe like a thought exists or an idea exists in general? I think that's like the biggest issue here. And I think when we kind of just like look at like science and biology, or pretty much any just like structured kind of inquiry, we're always looking at associations to determine like cause and effect. And even in philosophy, we have like the PSR, et cetera, and these ideas that like, you know, such things have effects. And when we look at things being associated with each other multiple times over and over and over again, we come to some conclusion that one thing causes the other thing, et cetera. So when we look at, I think like what we're trying to see here, Forrest, is like, what we're trying to say here is that we're seeing associations with the brain and matter produce a conscious experience. Like it seems to be the case that the conscious experience is associated with like matter and like the brain, and we don't. And I guess the biggest question is, what do you mean when you say consciousness exists? And how can something exist if it's not matter, kind of outside of the brain, I guess, is just like a really big question I have in regards to like your theory of consciousness.
All right, Lamont, we'll bring you back.
Yeah, so to answer you first, and then I will get to her. I don't know her name after that. But you mentioned consciousness being associated with matter. Nobody doubts that consciousness is associated with matter. In integrated information theory and global workspace theory, that's obvious. I'm not saying that there isn't a correlation between consciousness and brain states. I'm saying that you're just committing a classic causation correlation fallacy. If you know and can demonstrate to me how consciousness arises from states in the brain, I don't think you can. No neuroscientist can. This is the reason that the hard problem persists. But to move on to the question about existence and what I mean by existence, there are two things that I mean. Exist literally means ex out and sist to stand. So something that exists can be foregrounded. So if you're listening to my voice, you're ignoring background noises, which means you have foregrounded my voice. There's another form of existence, mind-independent existence. And this is what reductionists are looking for, right? So I think that the only thing which stands up to that test of what can exist mind-independently, it would be pure subjectivity. Because what the mind is a subject-object correlation, right? That's what the mind does. It says, I'm here, you're there. I'm this, and I want that. The mind is very correlated with brain states, again. But I think before all of that, there is pure subjectivity, pure awareness before that localization happens.
So you said that I can't demonstrate that like there is a correlative thing between a relationship between or sorry, obvious. Not a correlative, a causal. Pardon me. You said that I can't demonstrate a causal, right. Pardon me, a causal relationship between the brain and the mind, except I can provide strong.
I didn't say that.
What I heard you say, here's your chance to correct me. What I heard you say is that I can demonstrate that these things are associated, and nobody doubts that. But I'm how do you say, committing a correlation versus causation fallacy. That I'm saying here is a correlation, therefore it must be causal. Post hoc ergo proctor hoc, right? But the problem is that I actually can provide evidence for that causal relationship, because if we change the brain, we can equally change the mind in the same measure, and we can do it predictably and testably. Now, that you may not like those things, but my question to you remains, do you have a single bit of evidentiary, like anything, to demonstrate that you have a similar relationship with non-matter and the same consciousness? Can you manipulate something else that isn't material or demonstrate some non-actual material connection to this brain and show that the mind changes?
Are you intentionally using mind and consciousness synonymously, or is that an accident? Because if it's not, then it's just modal confusion.
Is that really where we're going to take the argument? Is that what?
No,
which do you prefer?
It pertains to it pertains to exactly what you asked. You said brain
if I have a light bulb,
and you said that's obvious, and you're right. It is obvious.
Lamont, if I have a light bulb here, right, and I flip a switch and electricity goes through the wire and it turns on the light bulb, right? If I cut the wire, the light bulb turns off. So I can now say that there is some correlation between this wire and this light bulb. Is the wire what's making the light bulb work? No, it's electricity, right? But the wire is definitely in control of this situation. So now we can say, here's the brain, and here's some sort of consciousness, mind, whatever you prefer to say. If I damage, alter, or destroy the brain, if I damage or alter or destroy the brain, then the consciousness changes.
No, that's the mistake.
What's the mistake?
The mistake is you're using mind and consciousness synonymously.
I literally just said whichever one you prefer.
No,
I'm asking you.
Wait. That shows that you're confused, though, because the mind is something you have.
I gave it to you. I didn't make a statement. I asked you which you prefer.
Consciousness is something you are.
I don't care which one. I said whichever you prefer.
I think, are you talking about awareness?
Okay,
so
show me, if you can, like now that you understand the distinction here, can you give me an example?
Your distinction.
Okay, fine. That's okay.
I would love to have whatever conversation you're having, but I'm stuck in this one.
Okay, fair enough. Let's get rid of the meta. I'm going to ask you a simple question. Now that you know we're not talking about mind and we're talking about awareness. I never said we weren't. Can you? That's fine. Don't take it personally. Maybe I misunderstood. I'll put it on me. Here's the question:
thing to get hung up on.
Can you give that same causal principle between brain states and consciousness? I'm not talking about mind. I'm talking about consciousness, which is pre-mental. Your mind develops. I'm not talking about that. That's something you have. I'm talking about what you are.
Are you talking about, I think, are you referring to just like the brute fact of like awareness, as in like animals have awareness and so do like humans. And when we like change the brain, that awareness can show up differently. Like you can have different thoughts and different ideas, but that awareness is still there. Is that the substance you're talking about?
Now you're getting it. You're understanding it. A housefly has awareness. Its mind is less developed and less capable of development than the human mind, because the human mind is correlated with a very powerful brain. So I'm not talking about mind. We agree on that mind and brain are correlated. I'm talking about pure subjectivity, awareness from which mind emerges and develops.
Now, I think, right, so here's where I can try to like give some of my slight biological understanding. So we know that like humans, as they develop, like fetuses, for example, at 24 to 28 weeks, we start to see like connections in I'm going to try to say it right, but the hypothalamo-cortical connections start to happen. And that's when we know that something like consciousness begins to arise. Again, biologists are still having a super hard time with consciousness. It's a difficult thing. We do know that, again, matter is greatly associated with like this conscious experience. And I think this is where again, I start to get to this with this confusion of like what you mean by existing mind independent, because like I think you gave some sort of you gave something, but it didn't really, I think, point to me of like what something existing really means. Like if we know that like from everything that we've seen thus far, that you need some of these connections and something like a braid, right, to form this experience. Where are you getting this idea that this awareness exists outside of this matter thing we got in our head? You know, I think that's kind of where,
well,
again, I could be misunderstood.
I think, I think another piece of evidence for this is that our brain only gives us a filtered version of consciousness. We have limited access to the light spectrum. Yeah, the first thing you learn in acoustic and articulatory phonetics, which is what I'm studying right now in cognitive science, that the universe is essentially silent. So when a sound wave goes into your ear, the eardrum vibrates, the cochlea translates that vibration into electrical signals. None of that is sound. The universe is actually silent. So what science is telling us is that most of the things that you take for granted, such as the bookshelf behind Forrest, if you look at those books, right, the colors, those are transjective properties. They're not objective. The shape of the books, the texture of the books, all like your brain is making all of that up right now, right? And you're seeing a very low resolution image of reality. So I'm saying, what is mind independent reality like? And I think it is purely subjective because the objective distinction depends on the brain. So when the brain goes, that's all that goes. That's what goes with it. Objectivity.
Right. But is that so I think we're presuming that this mind independent reality, this gets into loads of different questions, but let's presume that there is some reality that exists outside of our minds, right? Is that what you're calling consciousness?
Yes, that's what I'm calling pure awareness. Yeah.
I think that that's just it's almost like using the wrong word, right? I think that consciousness and the way that we know it describes almost the way in which we kind of self-interrogate. It's again, let's call it this awareness thing. If we didn't have without a single awareness, there's nothing to be aware. So I think a better way to describe that is just unfiltered reality. I don't know if the right word to use is consciousness for that. I mean, I guess I think that's just the biggest thing, right? I think that we're all, again, animals, bugs, insects, anything living is experiencing this outer world that we're presuming exists, right? Differently. But to presume that outer world is then pure consciousness or something, I think that would then be, to me, the leap. But I can take it to Forrest now or anyone else.
What is a better candidate? And maybe that's for both of you, and then I'll get off the line.
No, you go ahead first, Zina.
Okay, no worries. I think that when you posit that God definitely exists, I think our goal, right, as the dissenters, is not to posit an alternative, but more to interrogate where you're coming from with this claim that you're making. I think that it just, when you're describing unfiltered reality or mind-independent reality as consciousness, I don't think that we see that to just be the case in anything that we've seen, again, kind of Forrest has been saying. And I think that that's just almost how can consciousness that must be self-aware or must be aware, does pure awareness really exist if it's not a subject in of itself? I think this is kind of where we get into a whole different other category issue. But I mean, that's kind of just where my thoughts are lying. And yeah, Forrest, you can take it away.
I just want to throw out there, the answer to your initial question remains yes, because when I was saying that I have, a reason to assume or a reason to support this correlative causal relationship between matter and consciousness or mind or whatever you like to call it, and you threw a fucking tantrum about no, they're different things. I said that on purpose. I meant either one. So the question that you then followed up with and said, you're telling me that you think that there's a reason to say that consciousness itself is dependent. Yes, that's why I said that. I said it that way on purpose. I've been saying the same thing for this entire time. We are now 33 minutes into the call. I have a whole whiteboard full of notes about your God, and we haven't touched them because we've been sitting here arguing about the difference between consciousness and mind and matter and whether or not nothing can think. And I don't see any point in going forward. So Lamont, if you want to try again sometime and maybe we can talk about the God, I would love to do that. But it's not going to get anywhere if it's this kind of just semantic nonsense where we have to go 20 minutes of screaming about definitions for me to just say, yes, the thing that I said 20 minutes ago is what I meant to say. I don't know what the point is anymore.
I think I was just saying more, but yeah, I laid out my omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent, omnipresent.
And you proved none of it. And it did nobody any good. I don't believe that God exists. And I think that the definitions you gave me made no sense. The definition you gave me made no sense. I repeated the definition back to you and you agreed with it. And it doesn't stand up to any kind of reason in my head. And we didn't even talk about it because for 30 minutes we were talking about the definition you gave me that I repeated back to you and you agreed to doesn't make any logical sense to me. So we didn't even get to it because we were talking for freaking 30 minutes about whether or not brains can do thinking or if that's different than not thinking versus consciousness versus mind. And the things we said at the very beginning are the exact same things that we say now, and nobody learned anything and nobody grew. So I'm not going to continue on. If you want to call back later and try again,
look at the conversation.
Have you changed your mind in any way after this conversation, Lamont?
I think Zina and I have a little bit more to discuss.
That was a yes or no question, Lamont. That was a yes or no question. That was a yes or no question, Lamont. Did you change your mind in any way after this conversation?
What I mean, but according to the laws of the cooperative principle, I don't have to answer yes or no. I can be a little bit more
exactly. And so you don't even want to participate in me defending what I just said. I just said something. You challenged it. I'm giving you the opportunity to prove me wrong, and you won't do it because you're more interested in just bloviating about whatever the hell. I listened. I was here for the whole thing. I listened to what you and Zina said. Zina, did you change your mind at all about anything that Lamont said?
No, it's not about changing your mind.
Zina, did you change your mind at all about anything that Lamont said?
I did not, but I think that it's an interesting inquiry to have. I think consciousness is a cool topic. I love talking about it, but most of the time it's more thought throwing. And I know I never really kind of changed my position is already skeptical, I guess you could say, but yeah.
Yeah, I came, that's what I'm trying to get across to Lamont. If he could just calm down a little bit and hear what's going on around him here in the real world. We both heard everything you said. We both engaged with everything you said. Neither one of us were convinced by anything you said. I don't think you learned anything about anything. I guarantee, based on your attitude right now, that you have not left this conversation changing your beliefs or changing where your stance on any of this stuff. I'm not going to continue on because we are one breath away from the word qualia, and I will pull my eyeballs out. So I'm not doing it, dude. So if you want to call back in and try to actually talk about the God that you called in about, and that's what's on the call screen, I would love to do that. I don't think the definition of God that you gave me, that I repeated back to you, and you agreed was your definition of God, makes any kind of sense, and nothing you have given me over the past 36 minutes does anything to benefit that. So I'm going to move on now. Have an awesome rest of your day. God, that sucked.
It's a lot of philosophical jargon. I've been in there for a couple months now. It's a lot.
It's rough. It's real rough. It reminded me of your Jordan Peterson discussion. What do you mean by belief? I don't have to answer you yes or no because that's the contract as us as interlocutors. You see. Oh my God.
Thank you for watching that clip. If you enjoyed it, perhaps you should join us. Join us. Join us. Join us. Join us.
Join us.
At patreon.com/calltheline.